So hello everyone, and today I am happy to host Wendy Coones, a researcher from the Center for Image Science at the University for Continuing Education Krems in Austria. Wendy is actually here at the Open University campus in Rana. She is sitting right beside me. And she is visiting Dr. Chava Al-Dubi, who will join us in a few minutes, I'm sure, from the Department of Literature, Linguistics and Arts as part of Erasmus Exchange Grant. Wendy is an experienced exhibit developer and cultural scientific event coordinator. For over a decade, she is working in a research and development capacity as academic lead for postgraduate courses like exhibition development, media art histories, and media art cultures. One of their projects at the center is the Archive of Digital Art, and they have other projects in the field between the visual image sciences and the digital humanities. Thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be able to be here. Is everyone able to hear me okay? If you could maybe just give me a thumbs up. Great. Okay, wonderful. So yes, it's wonderful to be able to be here in person. Actually, I must say this is my first business trip anywhere outside of Austria since before COVID happened. And so I'm doubly pleased to be able to be here. It's something that we had already been planning in 2019, and finally in 2022, we're able to make it happen. And so I'm very much looking forward to future collaborations as well. Today, I'm going to be talking about something that not everybody is very versed in. It's a little bit of a niche field, but it's also quite important because of the things that it offers for addressing some of the challenges that we all are facing, which is then the archiving and documentation within the cultural fields to be able to work with digital media and digital born media. And so I'm going to be talking about the archiving challenges that are being addressed through the archiving of complex media art. And so once again, I thank you for being able to host me here. I'm going to try to stick to 45 minutes so that then we can really have a discussion afterwards as well. So thank you. Hopefully it won't be too fast, which I'm going through. It will be fairly complex, but I look forward to the conversation at the end as well. So media arts, it's actually interesting. It comes from a history that started perhaps in the 60s, maybe in the 70s, where artists began working with new digital media, working with computers, and today it's only expanded beyond that. There's a lot of very, very rich, all different kinds of ways that different media is being used. This slide just shows a couple of the different aspects of it. This one that's up in the upper middle, that is actually a reference to a historical media called an anagram, where there's a mirror in the middle, and then the image on the outside is projected onto the mirror in the middle. And this is actually made with video. The one that's on the upper left is being projected, the upper right, sorry, is being projected onto smoke. The one on the upper left is where you have a thing with your hand that you move over this this table or this surface that's on the floor, and you listen to different kinds of interviews that have been made by the artist. The one on the lower left is where the flashlight allows you to look inside of this virtual space and see these different kinds of characters. And so basically what's happening is that within what was one time called computer art, then it turned into digital art. Sometimes it's called media art, sometimes it's called new media art. Is that it's all using this very, very complex kinds of new media. It's not able to be preserved or archived without preserving the digital aspect to it, but very often it also has material aspects, and also very often it's interactive. So I think from just these 5 works, 3 of them are fully interactive, that they really don't function completely well without having a user there to be able to use them. So this is one of the challenges of these kinds of works, is because of the fact that they're technologically complex and also sometimes conceptually complex. Here's one of the early works. One of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a couple of examples here, and then some of the work that we're doing with the archiving of these works. And then I'll circle back around to these 3 works in the beginning to talk specifically about the archiving challenges of them. This first work is kind of a pioneer, one of the best of one of the early artworks. This is the person with the VR glasses. It is a work that exists inside of a VR space. It was made on a Silicon Graphics computer back in the mid-90s. It's called a mineral vegetable world that you can navigate through. And the way that you navigate is not in some kind of handheld device like what you would buy along with your Oculus Rift right now. This person who's in it is actually wearing something on their body like a diving suit. And so to move around in this world, you have to breathe in and breathe out, because that's the movement. It's like, it's the same as like diving underwater, that you navigate through the space with this bodysuit that the artist created specifically for navigating through this artwork. So this kind of work, it's not just the digital aspect of what the visuals are, but it's also this navigational suit that she created to be able to go through the space. This work, even though I think it's been referenced about 500 times in scientific articles, it is not actually collected by any museums, and I'm not even sure if it's able to be exhibited anymore because of the fact that the computers that it was originally made on are so outdated. I think that there are people who are working with Charlotte Davis now to be able to have this work in some way preserved, but I'm not sure how much that is actually moving forward, because one of the problems is that the tech industry is more interested in, they're not interested in things going obsolete. They just say, yeah, that's just part of the way that things go. And so as soon as software or hardware are obsolete, then very often the artworks as well have significant components that go obsolete. And so preservation and conservation is a real problem. And so thus we concentrate just on the archiving and documentation as much as we can. This is another work where it is using live scientific data. This work changes every time that it would be displayed. There are many, many kinds of media artworks or digital artworks that are using these kinds of same strategies, where it is dependent on live scientific data. One of the things that then artists are beginning to do is that they are recording some of the data that they prefer to use, that they most want to be able to use. So that then if the works are being displayed, for instance, in a place that doesn't have direct internet, doesn't have stable internet access or things like this to be able to get the live information from, that there's always a backup with that. One of the things, though, is also a question. There's for instance an artwork that's made with live data being collected from a glacier that's melting, and the question is, what happens to the artwork when the glacier is all melted away? Does the artwork no longer exist, or do you work with the data that has been recorded for that work? So this is then another example of one of the challenges that exist, is working with live data. This is then a work, I love this work. It's one of the most beautiful media artworks I've ever seen, but it's also very complex. It has these cameras that are watching the user, and then the wall is as well mounted with all of these little these little cameras that are watching the person walking around, and then feeding it into software that was written specifically to be able to then be as well projected into this kind of insect eye screen that's on yet another wall. And so it's a work that technologically is very complex. Conceptually, it's very complex. Being able to exhibit it is quite a challenge. Being able to document it is also quite a challenge. Just me explaining it doesn't do it nearly as much justice. I would highly recommend taking a look at it. There are videos of this work to be able to be seen, but I've never seen a video and I've never seen a description that actually comes close to describing what it's like when you actually get to experience it yourself. So that's yet another challenge, is how do you get across the experience of one of these artworks that are very, very interactive in the way that they are, the way that they're created. There are also media artworks that are working with live financial data, the visualization of financial data, which is obviously going to be quite volatile at some times. And again, I'm getting back to this issue of the hardware. So not only is the software sometimes difficult to be able to capture and keep, but very often there is hardware, there are interfaces that are being created by the artists themselves that need to be able to be captured in some kind of a way, not just for preservation, but also for the documentation of and the archiving of this, because being able to archive a still digital artwork is just going to be in the form of a JPEG. If you're getting it into net art, then you need to be able to have access to a net in some way to see the works. But what happens if the artist is creating something that is, we have things here where it's surround panoramas or very extensive screens, and interactive works, being able to really show how those work and what the parameters are is always one of the challenges that we have, to be able to get across this very, very complex way that these works are put together. There are some precedents of, there's a whole field of people, a kind of a subfield within the arts field of conservation and preservation that are looking at these works, trying to really find out how to capture them and how to preserve them. And they, within this small field of people, they share their knowledge quite open and willingly with one another. So it's a small but very passionate field of individuals that are interested in these kinds of works, and making sure that they in some way are able to survive and be available for the next generation, both for art historians to be able to understand and also for art students. One of the things that I apologize, I'm speaking too fast. Maybe I'll slow down here a little bit. I just looked at my clock and I think I'm doing okay on time. One of the things that then very often happens with people who are teaching making of media art to media artists is that it's very important to be able to have documentation of works available for students, so that then students are actually building upon the works that already exist, that they're building on the knowledge that's already been built up. There's nobody that's going to repaint Guernica because everybody has seen Guernica. It's always going to be building up on top of that. But if a student has never seen, for instance, images of osmos where it is this strange mineral vegetable VR, then they might make something like that, not knowing that they're recreating something that has already existed. And so the idea of being able to be original means that you have to have access to good documentation of the works that have come before you. The same thing happens with art history, is that in order to be able to understand these works within a historical context, within this kind of chronological and phenomena-oriented timeline, it's also important for art historians and art history students to be able to have access to these as well for doing their research. And the more information that they have available, the better, especially because some of these works are no longer visible anymore. All we have is the documentation of them. And so it's important to be able to have the documentation that really captures them as best as possible. And let's see. So what happened is actually in 1999, the idea came about from Professor Oliver Grau, who was an art historian looking at digital art and looking at media art. And he said, we need to be able to, as a field, have the ability to be able to research this work. And so he began, it started out actually as the database of virtual art, and then was renamed later when it no longer only included virtual art, but it also included all digital art, that it was renamed the Archive of Digital Art. So it's now over 20 years old. It is predominantly a research-based archive that is used to be able to make sure that then when art historians in the future look back at the early 21st century, that they don't just see a black hole of all of the works that were being made with digital media and that have disappeared or have gone obsolete, and that there's nothing left anymore. So this is what it looks like now. It is I'll go in a bit into some of the specificities of what the archive is doing. Within the archive, because of the fact that the majority of the artists are still alive, it is working with the concept that the artists will be uploading the work themselves, so that they remain the copyright holders. That what they're doing is they give the Archive of Digital Art permission to be able to archive and document, to be able to put their works, put the information about their works into a form that that others would be able to have access to it. Very often the works are as well available on, for instance, the artist's website. But if the artist then no longer has a website, or the gallery no longer has a website, or especially if the works have not been collected by museums, then sometimes the Archive of Digital Art is really like the best source of being able to get information about those artworks. There are as well, we regularly have artist features and scholar features. There's a section as well where it's not just the artworks, but it's also the literature about the works and the institutions that are showing the works and the events. So there are festivals, there are exhibitions that then are connecting between the institutions and the events that they have and the artworks that are shown there, and then the persons from the artworks. And one of the things, the persons associated with the artworks are not just the artists, but as much as possible, we try to encourage that all of the people who participated in the making of the artworks are included in there, so that then the people that were working on the technology, they can also be looked, because sometimes people, the engineers that are working in the technology of a particular work, they might work with one artist over here and another artist and a different artist over here. And so you can see sometimes these very interesting overlaps between the institutions, between the events, and between the technologies and technologists that are working on these works as well. And I'll go a little bit more into metadata in a bit. Here's a couple of the artists that we have in the archive. This is constantly growing. One question that sometimes comes up is, how do you decide who gets into the archive? We do have a gatekeeping system, but it's a gatekeeping system as much as possible that's set by the field. So we don't make decisions on any one particular person. What we say is that if you have had at least 5 exhibitions, or if your work has been included in 5 different forms of publication, then you can automatically be a contributor to the Archive of Digital Art. The other possibility is that we do have a board of advisors, and if one of the advisors say, yes, this person is really good, they need to be in, even though their work hasn't been exhibited 5 times or their work hasn't been written about 5 times, then this is another way of being able to be included. So it's not a free-for-all, everybody's allowed. There is a gatekeeping system, but we try to have it be a fairly neutral and field-based gatekeeping system that's used. We also have a thesaurus. The thesaurus is a very, very important and integral part of what we do there. You might see some other works in here that are not media art. I'll talk about that in a moment. But the thesaurus as well is important because sometimes the words that are used are being invented as the artists are inventing the technologies and inventing the interfaces that are being used. Whereas then some of them are also quite old. Some of the concepts. And so we did a research project a couple of years ago where we were looking specifically at what kinds of genres, what kinds of other aspects of these works were able to be seen across the works within the digital art field, but also we're going beyond the digital art field as well. And so you can see this, that was just going into a bit of the use of mirrors. The use of mirrors is something that's been across many, many different art genres and is also being used in the digital art field. Where did we work with the thesaurus? This is one of the important things. We started with the Getty's Art and Architecture thesaurus, and then started looking at some other thesaurus. There's a whole realm of symposia and festivals that are made around digital art that we consulted the literature, we consulted what kinds of words were being used by these different events over time, and then also other kinds of art historical thesauri to be able to reference to. And that was some really interesting work. It also evolves over time. So I think somewhere in here you can see the Ars Electronica. Ars Electronica at one point had a category called hybrid art, and then they renamed it live art, and now it's called live art. And so there's also an evolution of how some of these concepts are changing over time, because it is an active and alive way of making art right now that's really quite important to be able to keep up with, but also make sure that the works are able to be referenced. And so the thesaurus is a very important part of what we're doing. Here you can see a little bit of some information of where we are. This is an example from the Ars Electronica archive. One of the other things that we also do is that we, at the Archive of Digital Art, is that we look at other archives. And so some of the archives, they create their own categories that we need to also be able to match, because many of the works that might be, Ars Electronica is it's a museum science center space that regularly displays media art, and also has a festival each year that's based in Austria. And but they only archive the works that are shown there. They don't necessarily archive the works of artists outside of what only has been specific to them. And so one of the things that we also are very interested in at the Archive of Digital Art is being able to give the opportunity for artists to be able to put their entire oeuvre of works, including works that maybe are not as important or as good to be able to be put on display or be collected by museums, but where the artists, it might be a very seminal piece of work for them because it allowed them to go move into new directions. And so from a research point of view, they're very, very interesting works, even though they might not have ever actually been on display anywhere before. Here is a little bit of an overview of some of the different kinds of places where you can find digital art that's being integrated into archives and databases. One thing that's kind of important to know is that some of these you'll recognize and you'll know about, and some of them we know will last a long, long time. And some of these are very precarious, and a few of them even have disappeared, because very often what happens with archiving projects is that there is funding that's available to be able to archive them. The funding goes away, and then at some point people are not interested in paying the server fees anymore or keeping up with the technology anymore, and so it just disappears. There's a couple of examples within these lists of things that, either the last entry was from 2005, or you get a 404 answer. There's nothing there anymore. Even though there were many, many years and many, many colleagues that spent many hours to be able to put the data together. One of the things that we're doing right now at the Archive of Digital Art is that we're working with other archives. A couple of these archives, for instance, the Ars Electronica Festival, the File Festival in Brazil, the ISEA Symposium, is that we're really trying to get a number of different digital art and media art archives together so that then we can share information. And we're talking about being able to have a kind of a walk across or an API, so that then if you are in the Archive of Digital Art, for instance, and you find a particular work that maybe a window will pop up or something will happen, so that you can say, I would like to look at this artist as well, being the way that it's being archived in the ISEA Symposium archive, or the way that it's being in the Brazil archives, or vice versa. That then if somebody is in the Ars Electronica archive and they see a particular artist's work and they want to see more, but they're not going to get more than that one artwork that was on display at Ars Electronica, then they would be able to see where else other artworks are being archived by that artist, or where the same artwork is being archived in different ways. Because what's interesting is that out of all of these different archives, everybody archives in slightly different ways, and they gather different kinds of information that's slightly different. It might be that one institution has the ability to be able to interview the artist, and another institution has the ability to be able to write really rich data about the technology that was being used. And so one of the things that we're finding is that all of these archives, we don't have to do everything all separately, that we really want to be building on the capacities of one another because of the fact that we all do different kinds of things. So one of the things that I've noticed, for instance, with the Archive of Digital Art, is that we connect the artworks to the literature that is being published about the artworks, which is something that's not necessarily done in the other archives because they're not necessarily research archives. And that's something that they're not going to want to do because they have a different mission, they have a different purpose. And so this is then our kind of next direction that we want to go into, is connecting the different archives with one another, so that we really use the synergy together with one another. Going back to the thesaurus and going back to these old images, one of the things that we found is within the keywording is, what do you do when you're keywording using an architecture thesaurus that has words like landscape and has words like, different kinds of words that are not necessarily digital related. And so one of the things that we have is, as well at the Center for Image Science, is that a couple of years back, we digitized not the entire collection, but a very, very large portion of the collection of the monastery of Göttweig, which is very close to where the University of Continuing Education is. So it's a very special collection that was made. It has, I think, 30,000 prints that predominantly are from the Baroque era, because there was an abbot at the monastery at the time who decided that the monks needed to not just have knowledge and learning that was based in text or based in music, but also have visual knowledge. And so he sent out a call and said, bring us images as much as you can. And so there's this really wonderful collection which we did, which we digitized. Here's an image of the library. And so in working with these images, they have a collection. They had a natural science collection. They have many different kinds of collections, but they have this collection of graphic prints. And so here's a couple of them. The picture that is in the lower left here is the same technology as from that very first slide. It's a mirror in the middle, and then you put an image down on the surface, and you can see within the reflection on the mirror of what was drawn on the top. And so what we've found is that there's a continuity between the kinds of media that was then being made, or the kinds of conversations that were happening within these images that you could find in the pre-digital era to the era now. And so we really paid a lot of attention within the keywording of connecting digital art and digital art or media art, whichever you prefer to call it, connecting it to its historical counterparts as well, and not thinking that it was living in a bubble and didn't have any context with that. What's interesting as well to see is there are some artists who are really playing with when they have knowledge about the historical apparatus, that they're playing with that as well, which is an interesting aspect of these kinds of works. So what that means is that within the thesaurus work, we also tie it back into art history as well. And we currently have 2 research projects that are going on. And one of them is specifically tying together the Archive of Digital Art, the graphic collection of Göttweig, and the Media Arts Histories Archive as well. So I'm going to keep going. Here you can see a little bit, one of the things that we've created is with the thesaurus, you can search hierarchical, you can search by cloud, and you can also search by whichever one this is, it's going to, it does this automatically where it's looking through things, but you can find examples of works based on what it is that you are, what it is that you're particularly looking for. Here's a couple of quick visualizations. This is then where you can see the hierarchical section that where you can go by, you can search first by subject, and then under subject there is history or magic or psychology or art and science or time. You can also search by technology, and under technology you can search under hardware or software or interface. And so there's also subgroups that that were found within the keywording to be able to look at. This is actually a visualization of the keywording of one particular artist, a very prominent artist that's been working for a long time named Geoffrey Shaw. But you can see that if you look at Geoffrey Shaw and then you look up the word panorama, then there's how many different words are associated with his work under the genre of panorama. And then some even are linked between panorama and virtual reality. I don't know how many, unfortunately, I don't have a zoom in capability with this. This is just a fixed slide, but you can see how there's some areas that, for instance, memory theater. So Geoffrey Shaw has created a thing called a memory theater, and he's done it both in panorama form and also in virtual reality form. And so it's possible to be able to see these works and understand these works in the way that they cross across media, or but that they keep the kernel of concept the same. And this is something that then, for our research purposes, is just really quite important. It may be that there's not a lot of other people in the world that are interested in these very specific kinds of questions, but we get really excited about this kind of thing. So, and here's an example of kind of how you're able to move through the archive of digital art. The one on the left is a particular artist that then is on the right. You can see where he's working with two other artists. Actually, he's working, the other one is, the one on the right is actually an artwork that is as well associated with literature, and the co-workers and funding. There is both Alessandro Ludvico is somebody who is working in publishing, and Übermorgen is a artist group that were also working with him on this work. And so you can kind of get into this labyrinth of how there are different connections that are made between the artists, between the publishers, between the institutions, between the events, and then see the connections there. You can also up here on the right see a quick drop down of the keywords that are found for this particular work. Let's see. There also is a light box for anybody that remembers what light boxes are from the old slide days, where we encourage people to be able to take images and put them into a space so that then they can compare and contrast different works to be able to see how they are related to one another, so that then it's kind of your own study session in a way. I'm just going to go through a couple of these things. Here are some examples of works that are using panoramas, and you can see there's many of them are early. There are also obviously works using panoramas that are everywhere, including, if you would call it that, the immersive experiences of walking into the Van Gogh. Now these kinds of technologies are becoming almost mainstream, and at the time the artists were pressing the technology forward, but it's really, really fascinating. Oops. The motion detector, the lights went off. Shadow play is as well something that we find again and again, both historically and also today. Here are telematic spaces. One of the things that I really love, this one, the Intercity link back up on the top left, is from the let's see what year that is. Yeah. From 1989, when artists found a way to, like what we're doing right now, link 3 cities in a telematic space to be able to have conversations with each other. And they were using TV and telephones. They were putting the information. It wasn't even, it was like a pre-fax kind of information. It's really, really fascinating works of what used to be available now. I need to. There's also great examples of the media arts being used for the mediation in museums. These are not media art works. These are works being made with the same technologies that media artists are using to be able to do interpretive techniques within museums. This is as well, sometimes the boundaries that get pushed by artists find a real use. There was actually, before there was Google Earth and before there was Google Street View, there were two really important artworks that were made in the mid to late 90s that were doing this, exactly the same kind of thing. One, TerraVision and the Aspen movie map. I'll skip this for the next presentation some other time. So our expanded concept of documentation, you can see here that we have very specifically decided to be able to make sure that as much information about the artist or artists is collected, about the artworks, about the scholars, and about the institutions, and then so that then we can also cross-reference them as well. This has been a very important part of our work, is to be able to do this. This is then also where, you know, when I say if you can document media art, you can document anything. This is definitely true, because what do you know, there are artworks that are so complex that we've had to come up with new terms and new metadata that is required to be able to archive some of these works and to be able to document them. We have some publications as well about this. There's a really fantastic whole field dedicated to media art and its histories and its continuation. There are also programs in the media arts field. One of the things that then also students, these are actually just a couple of images from students' research that they've been doing, which are, I won't go into too much detail in, but you know, a single master thesis that's written about a single artwork, going into the details of how complex those works are, is something that's really very important for the field and needs to be as well included into the archives. And now I'm going to go back very quickly. Let me see on my time. I'm actually out of time. Then maybe what I will do, we'll return back to Desire of Codes. This is then with all of the little cameras and the software and the hardware. And this is then the one, as I mentioned, being on a silicon graphics and with a VR glass that nobody's able to see anymore. The question is, how are we able to archive these kinds of works? Not only just preserve them, but just to document and archive them. And with that, I will end and say thank you, everyone, and be available for questions as well. I'll turn on chat so that if people prefer to ask questions in the chat, then you can. And thank you very much. I know that it was a whirlwind of introduction into the archiving of digital art, but hopefully it made a little bit of sense. And let's see, I will. Yes.
It will be difficult for both of us to speak, but so the audience, if you hear stereo, let us know. I asked a question, but one of the slides answered it, but I will repeat it, and maybe you will. What are the instruments that are being archived in digital art? The image, the video description, textual description, algorithm, a photo of the work. So I saw on one of the latest slides that you mentioned on the list, is this a standard, or are you actually producing now the standards for?
Yeah, thank you very much. Whoops, good timing. One of the things that we have participated in. So, you know, what has evolved over time as well is in talking with the artists is that sometimes they will be making information that they don't necessarily see as archival information. They're just making videos of their works. And then we say, oh, but do you have videos? Do you make videos of your work with people using it? And then they go, oh, you're right. I need to make images and make videos of the works, if they're interactive, of people actually using them. We have also made video documentation in the past. And one of the things that's interesting is that making documentary video of interactive media artworks is different from making documentary films, and it's different from making video. It's its own kind of thing, because it has to be very descriptive, almost like the descriptive text that's used to describe images for vision impaired people to be able to, quote, see the image. But we take as much as we possibly can, and it will include images, it will include videos. We encourage also for the artists, if they have any kind of technical information, even if it's just a sketch that they did on a piece of paper that shows the technology of how something is put together here or there, then that's as well very important for us. Interviews. And often artists are interviewed, and so we include that. That's also one of the reasons why the connection to literature is so important for us. But there are specific aspects of the works that we request, and video is one of the better ways to be able to document interactive works. And also code, if they're able to or willing to put up the original algorithms. One of the interesting things is that there's a difference between the actual code and then the intent of the artist, of what they wanted for it to be able to do. Because if somebody who can write an algorithm can come back and say, okay, well, what the artist was intending was for it to be able to randomize a particular aspect of this kind of image, then they can recreate that with using whatever kind of language the program needs to be written in. And so there's a number of different kinds of ways that within the preservation field of digital art, where they talk about emulation and they talk about recreation, so that it's not just taking the original form and wanting to use that. There's a kind of a reuse, a reinterpretation of it that's possible as well. But of course, you have to ask the artist permission if they're okay with that. And so,
if you want to read the
okay, I'll go to the next. The disappearing uniqueness, digital art in the yes. This is then a good question. It's also partially connected to the question of what is art. There is a in the genre of digital art or media art, which is called sound art, and it's not music. It's really artworks that are being made that are talking about the phenomena of sound and about oral experiences. And this is then something that it would be interesting to go into the archive of digital art and see what kinds of works are being included in there with this. But that's one of the things that then would be done on a basis. There are festivals and events and also exhibitions that do display sound art. And so if an artwork or if an artist is being displayed or presented at those, then they would be included in the archive of digital art. And so again, we try to stay away from the business of deciding what's art and what's not. We let the field do that, and then we include them once they are being put on display, or once they're being included in these festivals. I hope that that answers the question a bit. The disappearing uniqueness, what I have found a little bit is that as soon as one uniqueness goes away, another one will pop up. There are some things in digital art that maybe, you know, for instance, the Google Street View, the fact that there was an artist in the 90s that was going through a town and making a video of it and making a navigable kind of thing. Today, that's something that we just take for granted that you can do. And so that digital uniqueness has gone away, but there are artists that are working today that have a digital uniqueness where you look at it and you go, wow, I've never heard of that before. And in 20 years, it's going to be every day to us. So the artists are constantly kind of pushing the boundaries of the media and what it's able to do. But what we say is that it's really important to be archiving and documenting those older works, so that then you can put them into context of understanding what was happening at the time when they were brand new. And how long does it take for something to go from being this really crazy artwork that nobody understands to it being something that everybody has on their phone now? So this is an important thing that we think is research worthy, so to say. Relate briefly to the LIFO project, researching advanced ways. Okay, yes, this is then, thank you, Hava, with mentioning this. We are working with there's a research project that is working with the Archive of Digital Art about being able to create new ways of accessing the research information, accessing the information. And we're partnering with two different art schools that what they are creating, one is like creating a big dome so that then when you're inside of this dome, that you can be moving around inside of a virtual space that is the space of this archive. And another is with the augmented reality glasses, so that then you can touch and feel the things, well, not feel, but you can touch and you can navigate through the archival space. And I think it's interesting because both of these interfaces, it's being made by digital artists to be able to access the research information and the archival information about digital art. And so it's kind of coming full circle. Okay, I'll write the name of the question about the name of the work that I recommended being able to view in a video. I'll write it into the chat. It's a Japanese woman, and this is then actually one of the things that then circles back to the importance of archiving and documentation. It's a Japanese woman that was working with a team of technologists and engineers and others. She was brilliant. She does amazing work, and she passed away, I think, 5 to 10 years ago, fairly young, from an unexpected sickness. And so the archiving of her works and the documentation of her works have been particularly difficult because of the fact that she was not able to be asked about the intention and the makings of her works. And so it's very, very important to start as early as possible to be able to be getting the artists themselves involved with the archiving of their works. Luckily, we are seeing within the Archive of Digital Art that artists who are not yet in danger of going away anytime soon are really saying, great, I'm going to get my work in there so that then I can make sure that, that my legacy is going to be available for others in the future.